On the 26th of February 1980, Elizabeth McCabe's partially clothed body was found in undergrowth in Templeton Woods, Dundee, Scotland. 11 months earlier, 18-year-old Carol had also been found just yards away. Both women had been strangled, but 4 decades later, we're still no closer to finding the murderer. This is a double cold case, and it's also known as the Templeton Woods murders. I'm Harley, this is All I'm Saying. Here we talk about true crime stories, and we also talk about strange stories that are far too strange to be true, but they are true. And a quick disclaimer before we go on, this is a true crime. It is a true story involving real people. So although I do want you to share it, and I do want you to comment, please be a little bit sensitive about what you say. Both bodies were discovered in Templeton Woods, so it only makes sense that we talk about Templeton Woods first. The woods are about 4 or 5 miles away from the centre of Dundee. Dundee is Scotland's 4th largest city. The woodland covers about 60 hectares, which is about 150 acres, aka 75 full-size football pitches. So it's not a small place by any means, and I'm not quite sure whereabouts in the woods these bodies were found. But it's interesting to note that the information centre or the visitor centre didn't open until 1980. So although before that it was still quite a busy place for walkers, dog walkers, cyclists, horse riders, it obviously became busier after the murders. The first murder was of Carol Lannen. She was 18-year-old, she was the mother of a 3-month-old baby, and she was a part-time prostitute. On the 21st of March 1979, her body had been found by 2 youths, and it had just been dumped in the woods near a picnic table. She'd been stripped and strangled, and then tied up and left by this picnic table. She was last seen the night before her disappearance. She was working and she got into a red estate car on Exchange Street. Now, Exchange Street is in the centre of Dundee, and it's about 5 miles away from the woods. Other prostitutes working on that road that night did see her get into the car, and they described the driver. They said he was a thin man with a pale complex, short dark hair, with sideburns and a moustache. He was about 20 to 30 year old, and a photo fit was issued. During the manhunt that followed, owners of red cars were interviewed and the photo fit were released to the public. 11 days after a body had been discovered, a handbag and her clothes were found on the banks of River Don in Kinto, Aberdeenshire. That's about 75 miles north of Templeton Woods. It's about an hour and a half's worth of driving. Despite this discovery, still nobody was arrested for Carol's death. Elizabeth McCabe was 20 years old and she was a trainee nursery nurse. She had 2 sisters and 1 brother. Not quite sure why you needed to know that, but the information came up, so I thought I'd include it. Useless information's better than no information, right? The night Elizabeth went missing, she was out having drinks with a friend in Dundee. Her friend was called Sarah Niven. Again, it's not very crucial, but that information could lead to something eventually, so her name was Sarah Niven. The pair visited lots of different clubs in the town centre, and then the night ended in Taser's nightclub on Union Street. Interestingly, Union Street is practically the next street from Exchange Street. By foot, it's a 0.2 mile walk, so it's 350 yards, but because of the one-way system of the roads, it's a 0.7 mile journey. It is the next street on. I saw 2 different versions of how that night ended. One's more reliable than the other, but we'll get onto that later. All we need to know right now is at 12:30, midnight, she left the club and she was apparently alone, but she never managed to make it home. The following day, her family reported her as missing. 15 days later, on the 26th of February 1980, which was the day after Elizabeth was supposed to turn 21, some men that were out hunting rabbits with some dogs stumbled across Elizabeth's body. She was partially clothed, she'd been strangled, and she'd been under a bit of undergrowth in Templeton Woods. The exact spot where Elizabeth laid was 150 yards away from where the naked body of Carol had been found 11 months prior. So now we've got this image that both girls were out in town that night that they went missing, just a few hundred yards away from each other, and then they went missing and both appeared in Templeton Woods and they've both been strangled. Now, it's not for me to decide, it's for you to decide, because we still don't know the truth. But the police have kind of gone, yeah, they're both connected, and then later on, more about this time, in the late 2000s, they've started to say, well, actually, we think might be looking for 2 killers. I mean, we've already got enough coincidences to suggest that it might be 1 killer, but the police now seem to be thinking that it's two killers for some reason. It later came out that Elizabeth's body had no defensive wounds whatsoever. Even her long nails were unharmed, which kind of blew my mind. That leads back to the video we did previously of Julie Pacer, and she'd been strangled to death and her nails were unharmed as well. In late February, clothing belonging to Elizabeth were found on Coupar Angus Road, which is 2 miles away from the woods, and it is on the route from where she'd been drinking to the woods. It's not by the main roads or anything, but it is just off a road, and it is a road that you could have cut through rather than going down the main roads. On the 11th of March 1980, forensic analysts found semen on a vaginal swab. This shows that Elizabeth had sex within 12 hours of her death. On the 2nd of April 1980, 5 weeks after her body had been found, a bag, jewellery and a photo belonging to Elizabeth were all found on Cobden Street. And then a week or two or three, a couple of weeks later, her shoes were also found in the same place. It was a 52-year-old widow that had found all these items, and she often went to this area because the area that all these things had been found were a bit like a wasteland, and people fly tip there and stuff and just threw rubbish out there. So she often went there looking for bits of metal to scrap in or whatever. And she'd come across this bag and she looked at it and she thought, well, that looks brand new. So she looked inside it and she'd seen this photo and stuff. So she took it to an hairdresser's that were on Cobden Street, and they phoned the police. I do just want to go back a bit because I think I've missed a little bit there. She found a bag which looked like new and still contained Elizabeth McCabe's college ID, but no cash in the purse. So obviously the police were phoned, the police came out, and the police taped the area off. Now this is the bit that I found really weird. When she found the bag, she phoned the police came and taped it off. But then a few weeks later she found her shoes. And again, she saw these shoes, suede shoes, and she picked them up thinking, wow, they look really new. And again, like I said, they were Elizabeth's. So when the police taped it off, did they search the area? You'd expect they did. Maybe they saw the shoes and thought nothing of it, and if they did, that's very callous. Maybe they didn't see the shoes and it's quite callous because they didn't search it properly. Or were the shoes put there after the police had searched the area, maybe thinking that it wouldn't be connected because they'd been put there after? I find that a very, very strange detail, that this woman had found some of her stuff, then the police had cordoned it off, and then she found more stuff. This street where all this stuff had been found was less than a mile away from where her clothes had been found. And again, it is still en route from where she'd been drinking to Templeton Woods. So you've got to ask, why? Is there someone in that area that's planting things, or was she around? It is quite strange. And I think because it's so much longer after they appeared, that also suggests that people have planted them. But that's just my opinion. I didn't read anything on that. People have kind of just flown over that bit of information. All of this led to the biggest investigation that Teesside police had ever had. More than 7,000 people were interviewed over the course of the investigation. The police visited every hotel, bed and breakfast and boarding house in the city. There was so much pressure and need to get this case solved. There was a bounty fund placed. It started by a local councillor and it quickly grew to £5,000. But because it didn't really bring any significant information, the money eventually got repaid. The murders of Carol and Elizabeth also came up when police were secretly investigating Yorkshire Ripper to see if there were any other cases that could be linked to the Yorkshire Ripper, but this didn't merit anything either. I mean, the Yorkshire Ripper thing, aka Peter Sutcliffe, is actually not a bad suggestion. He hit people with an hammer, yeah, I know he did, but he also strangled people. He did cause some of the murders by strangulation, and sometimes he strangled them and hit them with an hammer. So it weren't unknown for Peter Sutcliffe to strangle women. He targeted prostitutes. Carol were a prostitute because he was cleaning up the streets because God had told him to, or whatever bizarre thing he said in it. And also the ages. Carol was 18 and Elizabeth were 20. And now I looked at the ages of all his victims, and Peter Sutcliffe was convicted of 13 murders. 8 of them were aged between 18 and 28. One was 16, one was 32, and the other 3 were in their 40s. So, although there's a broad scale there, the condensity is between 18 and 28. And finally, with Peter Sutcliffe, he also left people naked. I don't know about all the murders. I've never really looked into great detail about Peter Sutcliffe, but I do know that there are at least 1 or 2 that he left naked. Another very well-known killer got dragged into the investigations as well. It was the Zodiac Killer. The Zodiac Killer is still unidentified, at least I think they are, but they were known for terrorising North California in 1960s. But they got linked to Carol Lannen's death after a dossier of evidence was given to Teesside police in 2005. The dossier had lots of information, and it claimed that Carol Lannen was the Zodiac Killer's final murder, but this were eventually quashed by investigators in California, and they ruled it out and said, no, that's not possible. With them two very well-known serial killers out of the way, a very real-life, a very close-knit court case happened, and it was the court case of former taxi driver Vincent Simpson. He was first interviewed by police on the 2nd of March 1980, and I think it was in 2005, this all got dragged back up again, and he got dragged through the Dundee Sheriff Court, accused of Elizabeth's murder. But after a long, hard court case, the jury returned a not guilty verdict. One of the things that put Vincent Simpson massively in the crosshairs of the police is very early on he admitted to police that he walked his dog around Templeton Woods, and he did so on the day that Elizabeth went missing. And like I said, this caught police's attention. Police then interrogated him for 5 days, or shall I say, they questioned him for 5 days. Some of them days, the questioning lasted from 5 a.m. to 11 p.m. That's 18 hours of questioning. And that went on for 5 days, although not every day were 18 hours. And Vincent, when he was first questioned, on that first day of him being questioned, he thought he was helping as a witness. And while he's there being a witness, the police are searching his house. And I think the police made him aware of this, but they never made him aware that that's only what they do if you're a suspect. During the court case, Vincent's defence really pressed hard. They made a mockery of the police, stating things like, on the 13th of March, just 23 days after Elizabeth's body had been found, the police attended a seance. They went to a medium, hoping to find answers to who killed Elizabeth. During the court case, retired Detective Superintendent Norman Robertson said it was never considered to be a serious line of inquiry. And he also dismissed the efforts as a charade that didn't last long. I read an article on thecareer.co.uk which stated that there was an itinerary of blunders by investigating officers, from mishandling of crucial evidence to alleged life on Mars witness intimidation. So I dug up on this a little bit more, and as I did, I found things like they took Vincent Simpson's diary. I'm not sure if I've mentioned it already, but Vincent Simpson had a private taxi company. And of course, he had a diary where he kept a log of all the bookings that had been made and stuff. And the police took that in as evidence. Now, when they're taking things as evidence, they need a sticker on them to say who took it, when it had took, blah, 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 how it had been. Any notes regarding that evidence should be on the evidence. But this sticker had gone missing, which is quite a big thing, really, especially because now you don't actually know the date that the evidence had been took. So it could have been tampered with or anything like that. It's just quite an important piece of information for the evidence. There was also some evidence items missing, including samples from the deceased, tights and pants. And obviously all these things could have been quite significant items. And another quite big thing, and fair enough to the police, this were in 1980, so DNA weren't such a big thing, but items of evidence from the victim was stored with Vincent Simpson's things. This is cross-contamination evidence. You can't do that, because now anything that's found on the victim's items isn't feasible if it's Vincent Simpson's, because the defence can easily say cross-contamination. During court, Professor Anthony Busuttil talked about the lack of defensive injuries and said it does not appear that she struggled for her life, and because of the injuries, death would have been quite sudden if not instant. He went on to explain that the death was caused by pressure on a crucial nerve, and he said that this could have been done by a struggle or by a sexual act. As I said previously, there was a witness that had been treated like a suspect by the defence, and that was Brian Lindsay. Now, as we talk about this, just remember this guy was a witness, he was never actually on trial. Since Elizabeth McCabe's murder, Brian Lindsay had been questioned by police about 18 times. On one occasion, he even accused them of trying to fit him up with a murder. Brian and Elizabeth had some sort of relationship. I don't think it was anything serious from what I've read, but he was given a really hard time in court, and he claims that it weren't that much of a serious thing, and the court kind of makes it out as if it were to Elizabeth. And during the entire questioning of Brian in the court, it's quite hard to determine through the story what's speculation, what's just been said, or what's actually been said as fact. Brian Lindsay had a number of convictions, all which related to crimes of dishonesty. So there were theft, there were fraud, there were forging of documents relating to road traffic matters. And I did also read that he had convictions for violence, but I can't confirm that, and I think that was just an accusation that the defence were making. Because the defence did also claim that Brian had attacked his own mother, breaking her ribs, busting one of her lungs, but he outright denied that and said it was total fabrication, it weren't true. He was a witness for quite some time. I think it was 2 days that he was in the witness stand, and throughout that he continuously protested his innocence and said he had nothing to do with Elizabeth's death or her disappearance. On the second day of him being a witness, Brian Lindsay said, "I knew one day I would get into court to prove my innocence. I didn't murder that lassie. There was no way I murdered that lassie. They have not found any of my forensics on that lassie's body." It was Mark Stewart who were defending Vincent Simpson, and he accused Brian of using Elizabeth for sex. It was reported that him and a friend took the nursery nurse back to Brian's home at that time and used her for sex 4 times, on 4 different occasions. Brian's alibi for the night that Elizabeth McCabe went missing was that he was in Dundee city centre, he was drinking, but in a different bar. He was with a friend, he got a bus home on his own, and he phoned somebody that he'd previously met while out drinking, using a phone box that was outside his house. He asked her if he could come round, and she said no. And then the meter ran out on the phone box, so he ran inside to his house, got another 20p, came back out, put it in the phone box, and phoned her again. Vincent's defence jumped on this and said, "Well, you were out looking for sex that night, weren't you? That's what you were doing." And Brian went, "Yeah, but that doesn't make me a murderer." The defence also claims that Brian knew that Elizabeth had had a tearful argument with a friend that night while they were in Teaser's bar, and apparently that argument was the fact that Elizabeth wanted to go to Brian's house, and her friend were like, "No, that's a stupid idea," so they had this big argument. And Brian were like, "No, that's the first time I've ever heard of that, it's completely news to me." But on that, see, this is what I mean about you can't tell what's speculation and what's random accusations, because I also read a statement from a friend, because obviously a friend was one of the last people to see her, so she attended court as a witness as well, and a friend basically said, yeah, she were crying that night, and yeah, it were in Teaser's bar, but it weren't anything to do with Elizabeth wanting to go to Brian's house. She didn't mention that bit, obviously, but according to her, the reason she was crying is because she thought nobody liked her. And she said at the end of the night, she'd gone to get a coat and gone to get Elizabeth, who'd already got a coat on just before her. After the lights had come on, she looked at her, Elizabeth's got a coat on. She's like, 1 minute, I'll just go and get mine. She comes back, Elizabeth's not there. So a friend looks around the nightclub, can't find her. Goes and looks around at the taxi rank, can't find her. And then she goes home and she phones Elizabeth's parents, and she's like, "Look, I don't know where she is, she's not there." So obviously Elizabeth's parents were a little bit concerned, and the next day they wake up, she's still not home, so that's when they phone the police. Now, the only thing in my eyes that puts Brian directly in the spotlight is the clothes of Elizabeth that were found on Cobden Street was only a few hundred yards away from where Brian lived, which were on Logie Street, Logie Street. And like I say, that's only a few hundred yards. So... But I'm kind of going, well, it's all in that area, you know? Coincidence, maybe? I think the defence were just clutching at straws, to be honest. Since 2007, there hasn't been a single shred of evidence to come out. And Elizabeth's case and Carol's case are as cold as they can be. The locals in the area dubbed the killer the Disco Killer. And they got a bit worried and a bit wary, so they stopped going out as much and they shunned the nightlife of the city. Now, as far as the cold case goes, that's about as much information as I've got. But I did see a very interesting post on Reddit from somebody that's deleted their account, so I'm sorry I can't credit you. And I thought I'd go through that because they put quite a bit of information out, and it's something that I didn't read anywhere else. And there is a lot of suspects that the public have brought forward, but I don't know, this one, they just seem to know what they're on about a bit more, so I thought I'd include that in the video as well. And I'm not going to go too much into detail on it. I'm just going to briefly tell you what they put. And if you want to go and read the original post, you can. And if you want to look up the stories, you can. But like I said, I'm just going to give you a vague outline so you know it's been said. It starts off by describing another victim, which is Linda Hunter. Linda Hunter was pregnant when she went missing on Friday, the 21st of August, 1987. She went missing from her home in Cornouster, I think that's how you pronounce it, which is 12 miles away from Dundee, and a car, as well as a beloved collie dog, had also gone missing. Police did a search, and they searched all the way from Cornouster all the way to Manchester. Now that's a 300-mile journey, but that is, strangely enough, where a car was found, and that was on the day after. The driver's seat had been adjusted for someone taller, so they reckon that Linda weren't driving. Her bag and some items for the dog were in the boot, and money and her credit cards were also gone, but there were a single earring found. And the car seats were usually covered up by this grey covers. You know, the seat covers that you put on to protect the seats from stains and whatnot. Well, the car seats usually had them on, but the front ones were missing, and the floor mat on the passenger side was also missing. To make it even stranger, the spare wheel had been fitted on the front off side of the car. But the original wheel were nowhere to be found, and neither was the tools. So somewhere between her home and Manchester, this 300-mile trip, somebody had changed the tyre, or wheel, and left that as well as with the tools behind. And I don't think today they've ever been found. But yet again, I haven't looked it up, so I'm not quite sure. As always, the police suspected her husband as being the prime suspect. But his alibi, whether he'd been in various places around Dundee and Cornouster on the day of Linda's disappearance. Interestingly enough, Linda's case was the first ever Scottish case to appear on Crime Watch. And when it did, information came flooding in from the public. And a lot of that information incriminated her husband. Her husband was called Andrew Hunter, and he was charged with Linda's murder. Linda was found 6 months later in woods in Ladybank, which, if you go from their home to Dundee and then go for another 18 miles, that's where Ladybank is. It's kind of in the opposite direction from Dundee to where Templeton Woods are. Linda had been strangled by her dog chain, and it was still wrapped round her neck when she was found. Andrew Hunter was convicted in 1988 for strangling his wife with a dog lead. He went on to die in prison of a heart attack on the 19th of July 1993. Now, obviously at this point I was reading this going, well, this is just massively circumstantial. Is there even a connection between him and the other people? But there is. He'd apparently been in contact with Carol during his employment as a social worker. And even more than that, he matched the photo fit that the other prostitutes had given of the man that picked Carol up. But Andrew had never ever been questioned or interviewed about Carol's death. It was also said that Andrew was well known to prostitutes and he was quite toxic to women. There you go, guys. That is the end. That's all I've got for these stories. I'm very sorry. It does seem like I've took you down lots of little rabbit holes and then just left you there, and I apologise for that. I apologise if this video is not as good as usual. It is currently 33 degrees in here, and I did have my fan on, but it made a noise, so I had to turn it off to improve the quality of the audio. So I am very sorry about that. I hope you found this video interesting. I hope you got something from it. And I hope you like the presentation and everything. If you do, please subscribe. If you've got any recommendations of stories you want me to do or cases you want me to do, please do put it in the comments below. Please do comment on what you think of the cases, any other leads or witnesses or anything else. I do want your thoughts and opinions on the cases and on the way I film and do the cases. I care about what you think. But for now, I'm going to go and have a really cold shower and hide in some dark corner while I edit this video. Till next week, guys. Oh, before we go, if you're not into the stranger and fiction stuff, do keep an eye out next weekend anyway, because for the next 2 or 3 weeks, I'm going to be doing something different on a weekend. The stranger and fiction will come back, but for this weekend and the weekend after, it's going to be a slightly different type of video that I think anyone watching this might be interested in. So until then, guys, goodbye.